day that the weather is really nice and warm, and the flowers are coming out. I'm so honored to introduce this panel. I wanted to start first with thanking some of our sponsors. And introducing myself. Sorry. I'm Laura Allred Hurtado. I'm the executive director here, and a huge fan of these panelists and the artist and Ben, and so excited to have you hear from all of them tonight. I wanted to thank the sponsors that make our work possible. The Diane and Sam Stewart Family Foundation that sponsors our main gallery exhibitions. National Endowment for the Arts sponsored this exhibition in particular, Utah Division of Arts and Museums, as well as ZAP and the citizens of Salt Lake County. Thank you for your support via taxes. I want to introduce our panelists as well so that they can just jump straight into questions. So Ben Abbott, I'm very seasoned in this. Let me talk to you a little bit about our formula. So our last panel, what we did was we had 4 scientists and then our curator interviewing the 4 scientists. And we thought, how great would that be to reverse that model and have 4 artists in the show being interviewed by one of the leading scientists in the field. And what sort of kind of cross-pollination and interesting conversation can we have by these really mixed pairings rather than keeping the scientists together and the artists together? I think there's a lot of richness and a lot that can yield by everyone kind of joining in the conversation about the lake and thinking of solutions and approaches and perspectives together. So that pairing was quite important to us. So I want to introduce our moderator, Ben Abbott. He's the executive director of Grow the Flow and is a professor of environmental science and sustainability at BYU. He was also recently featured in the NYtimes opinion piece authored by Terry Tempest Williams, which focuses on the Great Salt Lake's emerging environmental water crisis. And was one of the co-authors and collaborators among many on a Great Salt Lake report titled Emergency Measures Needed to Rescue the Great Salt Lake from Ongoing Collapse. And one of the themes of this report really focuses on the need of building trust between all of the partners, between the farmers and the brine shrimp fisher people and the salt harvesters, and I'm really killing it, and the horticulturalist and the water users and so on and so forth, that ultimately it comes down to a crisis of trust. And I think Ben will talk about that a little bit, and then we'll expand that into our larger conversation. Next to him is Mary Toscano, whose narrative-based drawings and prints explore the concept of memory. Oh, nope, sorry. Mary, raise your hand. I'm going for like 3 strikes tonight, so I'm just trying to keep like the comedic timing up, and it'll be fun. Her work explores concepts of memory and detachment. Their highly rendered hand-drawn images in this exhibition illustrate the shoreline of the Great Salt Lake as it slowly recedes, revealing objects that were left, dropped, discarded in the lake bed. Jared and I, when we were looking at this work, really saw it as this sort of forecasting of kind of ecological disaster, like the way an archaeologist would come and explore and find these works later, but it also is a pretty immediate future, so it's a little eerie in that way. To her right is Alisha Anderson. She's an artist who also holds a master's degree in environmental humanities, and their practice is research and place-based, focusing on ecological and social issues through long-term embodied research. The title of her work, Lacustrine. I actually listened to that a few times, but lacustrine means dried lake bed, and it's a geological formation that comes from, well, as the word describes, a dried lake bed. Next is Fritz Kollmann. He's a landscaper and horticulturalist who works to install responsible gardens in a desert, and he collaborated with Redview Gardens on their 3-acre water conservation garden, and works to make planting adjustments and water-wise gardening a part of the solution to declining water levels. Last is Eugene Tapahe. He's a designer, artist, and photographer whose practice seeks to honor his ancestral Diné ancestral connections to the land. In his piece, he created a personal installation as an offering to the land, where he walked in a kind of sacred way through north, south, east, west, navigating over and over to make this meditative and ritual pattern and spherical symbol that contours the motion contours the motion of the land and the water upon the earth. And he is in high demand and is speaking tomorrow in Arizona, so he will be walking out mid-panel, not because he's offended, but because he has a flight to catch. So he's just gonna sort of like slip out that door off to bigger and brighter pastures. Thank you all for coming tonight, and I'm so excited to hear everyone. Thanks, Ben.
Now we're still starting with video?
Yes. No. Yes.
Okay, I think we're going to start with the,
Yes.
yeah, there we are, okay.
Start with a star. A sun potent enough to heat air to wind, to burn water to vapor, so that one can push the other. Sculpt a basin in the earth, an area of land marked by the rise of mountains and the fall of valleys. An area where water drains in, not out. Insert water. Watch it descend, find earth, flow inward by inlet. Watch it blanket the small basin, spreading to become wetlands and lake. See the water stretch and search and never unearth a route out. Its only outlet is up. Add salt, a mineral embedded in soil and stone, which the waters gather and carry downward. Allow the water and salt to mix, then rest. See the salt accumulate. It is so flat you see the curvature of the earth. That is why it's used as a speedway. My feet touch the sharp grain of crystal earth, and all I see is a blank canvas, tautly stretched and coarsely woven. In the past, salt was currency. Its value was proportional to our need, for we cannot live without it. It is integral to our body functioning. We think with salt, we move with salt, and when the world pushes on us in toil or sorrow, we answer in salt, with our sweat and our tears. It has heavy feet as it flows downward and inward, and unlike water, never upward. Yet it cleans wounds. It suppresses bitterness so other flavors thrive. It draws out water to prevent decay, and thus preserve what is valued. It is for and of this earth. Let water suspend salt for a moment, until heat from the star breaks the hold. Water ascends as vapor, and the salt remains. making it difficult for life to thrive in this small sea. So start with simple life, fueled by the star, microbes in the form of algae and bacteria. Watch the water turn green and red. It is strange to paddle in this water. The high salinity in Gunnison Bay, the north arm of the lake, supports a red pigment algae. It makes water the warmth of a sunset, the pink of my flesh. I lie into the warm water, trust it, and it takes me. Skin stings as salt enters cuts and scratches, places where the lake's marshes opened my skin. I float between blue sky, pink water, and rise and fall with each swell. I float, thinking of a place that cuts and heals, opens and fills. I leave the water and the salt stays, in my clothes and on my skin. I feel only water until it begins to dry. Clothing stiffens and glistens. Skin feels the film. Then I see the sheen as it crystallizes to a white dusting. Sun, water, salt. They make this cycle. The salt is invisible until the water burns away. Bring birds who arrive and depart with a change in season. Seasons brought by variation in the star's heating. Have birds eat fish and insects in the wetlands, flies and shrimp on the lake. And look to the skies. They are made for air. That is where they float. Compared to our bones, theirs are reduced. Skeletal elements have been fused or removed, and their bones, while dense, can also be hollow, laced with air cells to reduce weight and assist in breathing. Their lungs allow them to take in oxygen, even when exhaling, producing a continuous stream of air to power their flight. We have set aside areas around the lake for the birds, though they see no boundaries, no partitioning of this world. They see patterns of color, places of nourishment. So here, agriculture and migration live together, and I see birds wherever I go. Like us, birds stand on soil. Like us, they wade where sight can clutter, and the next step becomes unsure. Then they rise. They ascend to see life recede and flatten, and the path ahead clears. Their view is what we travel by. Our maps mimic their sight. For they knew places before us. They understood the globe before we did. They take routes out of our realm. So as the story goes, when Noah longed for the hope of land within a world of water, he sent a bird, a dove, and he watched. I watch. I watch with any part of my body that can follow. I turn and twist to match every murmur of wings. My eyes and head track them across horizon and zenith. And I stand with a riveted stare as they diminish into a spreading sky. I feel my own density. What is it like to have hollow bones? To know air will keep your leap. To breathe in a place continuously. To meet life, then soar above it. And blend the two into a way of living. Birds rise. Salt stays. I float in between.
Thank you, Alisha. What a wonderful way to start the discussion. We had a conversation a few days ago thinking about what did we want to talk about, and there were three big questions that have really stuck with me since that time. The first one is, how did we get here? In this place at this time when the lake that we all depend on in so many ways is in such great peril. So that retrospective, how did we get here? And of course, we all understand a little bit about hydrology, right? If you turn down the amount of water flowing to a lake whose only outlet is the sky, then the level drops. But I guess if we could think more deeply, because I know a lot about the hydrology, but actually that's not what we need to understand right now. What we need to understand is how do we mobilize millions of people, many of whom are feeling a great amount of insecurity and fear, to work together. So that's the first question, how did we get here? The second question is, how much of the problem do you think that we've seen? And how much of what's going on do we actually understand? And how much of it have we not yet dared to witness or think about? And the third question is, where do we go from here? Is there a path back toward a place of healing and hope? If so, what role does art play in that? What role do individuals, what role does culture play in that? So those are the three, it should be really easy actually, we should be done. Those are the three questions that I was thinking that I'd love to hear from you on, and this can absolutely just be a conversation. Does anybody want to take on that first one? How did we get here? What's contributed to where we are today?
I feel that it's like the human desire for just unbridled growth and greenery and lushness, and just, if we can do it, let's just do it. That kind of an attitude, like the resources, if I see them right in front of me, let's just keep using them and creating spaces that we like and doing what we want with the resource, until we realize that it's not infinite.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the human desire for niceness and more water, more lushness. Especially here, where it's a little dry.
Yeah. So that a desire for contrast and a desire for things that are good, right? And maybe even a desire to, the legal term is to put the water to beneficial use, right? Which of course has had a very, very narrow range of approved legal uses.
Am I supposed to pull this close? Okay. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Okay. Yeah, adding on that, I think there's also, we have to reckon with our history. In terms of, yes, there's human hubris in terms of wanting more and growth, but that is also very much a settler colonial mindset that came with certain people into this valley. And I think we have to be honest about that and recognize indigenous and land-based and traditional ecological knowledge that doesn't operate in that framework. And so, as many people have said, I agree with, I think indigenous voices, land-based voices need to be at the forefront because they represent often a framework that counters that. And so I think until we are ready to reckon with the history of stolen land here in Utah, until we're ready to reckon with that full history, I don't think we can start changing our framework and asking those really hard questions about just how do we relate with the land around us and how to relate with all beings around us, including the more than human beings, and how do we change the hierarchy where humans are always at the top and what we need, what we want always takes precedent. And so I think it's just, there's a huge paradigm shift that happened, and it needs to change. And that it's no small order, but I think until we really get deep into how we relate to the land and all beings around us, I don't think we can, I think it will be temporary fixes.
Eugene, while you take that, I just was thinking about the story of Strawberry Reservoir, right? So there's water that used to flow to the Colorado, which now flows toward Great Salt Lake through a marvel of settler colonial engineering, a tunnel bored right through the mountain, dug from both sides. And it's so interesting to me that there's a narrative now, right? We've created as a state a Colorado River Authority whose job it is to go and fight for more water from the Colorado, which we're saying belongs to us. But the water that we're taking from Strawberry Reservoir was stolen from the Ute Indian tribe in very recent history, right? There are people that still remember when the justification was when the reservoir came up, the places that they used to take water from no longer existed. And so that water needed to be put for beneficial use. So these claims on claims on claims.
That's a great
I just want to add that we as human beings, we don't really think of global. We always just think about where we live, our own boundaries. And I think that's the part that we have a hard time with. I think the one thing I always tell people I see, or even my family, my daughters, is that if we were gone, the land would thrive. If we weren't here, the animals would thrive. If we weren't here, the water would be great. And I feel like we don't think of it in that sense. Instead, we want to live lushly, abundantly with the resources around us. And just like Ben said, we don't worry about who's downriver. My tribe, the Diné people, are fighting for their water. But no one cares. No one cares that we're in the same type of climate that is Utah. Because Utah really is a desert, plateau area. And so why is it that Utah gets the water and my people don't? And so I feel like what Alisha said is so true, because I don't have a problem with going without. I know I can live off the land. I know my ancestors have. And so for me, I think it's got to be to the point where it's like, it's not just, oh, it's their problem. It's all of our problems. And I think that's what I feel like, as far as an artist, as far as a person who does photos of landscape, I've, within the past 5 years, I've seen such a huge change in climate, not only just the climate itself, but also the people that are actually interacting with it, because now it's all bucket list. trash is everywhere now. Trails have been mowed through in areas that there were no trails before. And I think that's the part that we don't think about. We just think, hey, you know, we gotta get to this spot because so-and-so was there, so I gotta get that shot also. So it really comes back down to is, where's your respect? And I tell my kids this, who are your parents? What are their values? What were my grandparents' values? And I think that's where it comes from, is it's within ourselves to be able to make great decisions.
Thank you, Eugene. You know, we used to say that water always flows down gradient, right? Usually that's downhill, but not always for groundwater or for water vapor. But it always flows down gradient. But now, and this is actually in the hydrological literature, we know that water flows toward money. And humans are now consuming more than 50% of the global river flow from land to ocean. And of course, in areas that don't drain to the ocean like here, that percentage is often much higher. But I'd love to hear a little more about this idea, if we weren't here, because I have felt that the way to move toward trust and the way to solve some of the conflict, it isn't to wish that certain types of people didn't exist, or that all people didn't exist, right? That seems like a real dead end when we say whatever the group is, whether it's an economic grouping like alfalfa farmers, or a cultural grouping like European settlers, or a specific tribe or indigenous. So how, do you have any thoughts on where we are here and what can we transform or change so that that thriving can happen? Or is there not a path forward?
I think recently, within the past 5 years, I think we've all, if we can all get on board, I mean, there's a lot of scientists now that are looking at indigenous peoples' cultures and traditions of how they were to care for the land. And we've always known how to care for the land. And it, like you said, I mean, we didn't have money, and we didn't really care about hugging all the water or all the land. We took only what we needed to survive. So I feel like that attitude of being able to just do what we can instead of doing without is, yeah, it'd be great, but do what we can to be able just to survive. I think if we all did that in a certain level, we could reach that point. I've been, like I said, 10 years now, I've been doing landscape photography. I go out and I'm out by myself in these areas, and it's totally changed. It's scaring me. It scares I'm scared for the future. And it's just been 10 years. So I don't know, it's difficult in the sense of like, okay, how do we make that change? And so through my art and through what I'm trying to do is bring attention to the land, bring attention to the healing powers of the natural elements, sage, cedar, and just the land itself, and trying to bring that back. I think it's just all about balance and harmony, and Peugeot, which means balance and harmony, and trying to bring that back to our own lives.
Thank you. That does. It's not a path forward. It's a cycle forward, a feedback where, as we attend to the land and notice what's happening and seek to heal our relationship, then that fear, that desire, that need to consume more is healed within us, and maybe we can learn a little bit. Thank you.
Adding to that, though, I feel like there's like huge power differences, and that oftentimes it's some people's luxury is most times there are few people's luxury prioritized over the health of everything else in a system.
Yeah.
And then the people I see engaging in conversations around fixing that problem are not the people who are living with the most power and luxury. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, yes, like everyone can contribute, but we still have like huge power differences that we cannot
Yeah.
overcome with just wishing it, or
Yeah.
even talking about the problem. You know, I think there's, you know, every time there's a summit where people gather like around the world to meet and talk about environmental issues, they're like taking private jets there. And that is so dysfunctional. And people rarely even talk about that dysfunction.
Thank you, Mary. No, and it's so important. Oxfam's most recent report just came out. They calculate global emissions split into economic quantiles, and the new numbers are the top 1% of the wealthiest people in the world are responsible for a full 2/3 of global emissions. And the bottom 60% of people are responsible for around 5% of emissions. And this gets back, I think it interacts with Eugene's comment about how we can sometimes get into a place that's misanthropic, where we simply hate humanity. But actually, the problem is not too many people. The problem is too much consumption. And you see that here with Great Salt Lake, right? The maximum water consumption that happened in the watershed was in the 1990s. Since that time, the water consumption has stayed the same or even slightly declined. During that time, the population in the watershed has tripled. And not to say that all is well, right? But it demonstrates how there isn't an inevitable relationship between the number of people and the size of our footprint, right? There are things, maybe that's a pathway forward as well.
I see a pathway forward through the work that I do with gardening. And it sounds pretty simple, but when I establish like I don't know, I'll call an honest landscape of plants that use an appropriate amount of water for this climate. And so, you know, you plant everything or you seed everything and you sit back and you're like, it's all in, you're looking at it. It's like, yeah, look at this, I did something. Then you come back like 10 days later and every space in between what you did is completely full of weeds and other things that you need to do. You need to literally get down on the ground and work really hard. And that like constant input that you need to make the change for in my work, which is like using less water to still grow something that is like pleasant to be in, nice to look at, and serves not only the human desires, but the desires of insects and animals, birds, whatever. Just connecting with the work itself and the consistency required, I think, is a great model for the work it's going to take for all of us to change in small ways to like reduce our water consumption. It's just like it doesn't stop, but once you start, it's like for me, once I start doing a project and you see it through and it's finally established and it doesn't take all this work and you've reduced your water consumption, you realize that I realize the level that it's what it really takes to get it done, and it's not like an easy thing, but it is possible. And like from my own work on my own property now, you know, I'm watering twice a month in the summer, and it looks nice to me. Like it looks like a place where I want to hang out, and it looks how I feel like the earth should look without a ton of like water being thrown on it.
I think that's profound. So a change in the landscape that you are a steward over, but also a change in what you find as beautiful,
Yeah.
and in the expectations that we have of the world around us.
Yeah, the acceptance of a little bit of tan, or like the seasonality of the way that things look. Like it can't always be green. It's literally nothing is always green. I mean, okay, the conifers are mostly always green, but they're adapted. So yeah.
There was an amazing piece of branding that I heard. You know, we used to say that let your lawn go brown, but I heard somebody in a conservancy district say, let your lawn go golden.
Oh yes.
Isn't that like objectively better? Like ripen and turn golden.
You know, it really does catch the light.
Yeah. So I wonder, what about your thoughts on how much of the problem have we seen? You know, are there misconceptions that you see? Is there rhetoric that you see that reveals that we really are understanding this, or that we're really off base in different ways?
I feel like people are getting it. I mean, I feel like the word is out, and like maybe it just feels really urgent for me because of the work that I do. But
Yeah.
if anyone's ever been to like another dry lake bed, like the severe dry lake bed where a lot of our windstorms come from,
Yeah.
it's pretty stark out there. There's not a lot of diversity. There's like a couple main types of shrubs, and sure, there's tons of birds and whatnot. But if the Salt Lake looked like that, it would be pretty dusty here. And I think until it really hits, I don't imagine people are going to be able to, conjure it up.
Huh. So you're saying you think that we haven't really imagined, you know, I see the signs sometimes that say Dust Lake City.
Right.
But it hasn't been internalized for everyone, or you're saying that it has been?
I think it's on its way
Okay.
for a lot of people, yeah.
Again, I don't know if this is a pull this first. Okay. I think yes, in some ways. I mean, I think we all sense there's a certain traction that's happening, but I do wonder about the depth, and you kind of mentioned this when we chatted earlier about this idea of fear-based change. And I think, and sorry, am I going to?
No, this is, you go there.
Okay. But I think when it's fear-based, our perspective is very narrow, and it's just a evolutionary aspect of fear, right? Our focus narrows on what is causing the problem, what we need to run from, for instance. And I think that while that can spur people to change, I don't think it's sustainable, and I think it's problematic when it's so narrow. So if the focus is we're worried about dust hitting our lungs, we might go to quick fixes for that, but in that process might actually harm other parts that we should also, does that make sense? Like, we need this holistic aspect, and I think fear-based can sometimes put us so narrow that we can misstep as we're trying to create change. And I think about Wangari Maathai, who started the Green Belt movement in Africa, and she said, if you want to do anything for the environment, you have to find what's disconnected. And I wonder if we've really gotten to the root of what's disconnected. And if we haven't gotten there, then I think it's just going to be temporary fixes, especially if it's fear-based. And which, again, I understand because we have this urgency and we want to push people, propel forward, because we don't have a decade, we have less than that. And so we feel this urgency, and so fear-based can sometimes work in propelling forward, but I wonder how can we then transition to a sustainable, more holistic viewpoint as we move forward, where it's not just about our lungs, it's also about the 10 million birds that land here and expect water every year. And that breaks my heart to imagine them coming and not finding water.
Yeah.
And we have to hold that as well as how it will impact us.
Thank you, Alisha. And that's really helpful to me as I try to understand why we have flailed in some ways. You know, because I agree that many people, including those with power, right, do see the importance of this. But when the motivation is we've got to keep the dust from blowing into our lawns and lungs, then the answer is, I got a phone call the other day. Bring, bring. Hey, are you the guy who works at Great Salt Lake? I know how to solve the dust. It's covered in plastic. You know, and that'll be fine, and that also increases the runoff, so the lake will fill up faster.
Yeah, and there's no thought to the birds, right? There's no thought, yeah.
So that kind of narrative comes from not recognizing what's disconnected, and it not being about positive relationship and our responsibility to all people, human and non-human. Instead, it's fixing a technical problem.
Is it because people don't want to have to change anything about the way that they are experiencing life. Like, you want something to be different so bad, but not yourself.
Yeah.
So all the fixes are, well, this fix would be great, because then I can still do whatever I've been doing.
Yeah. I think that that's really a part of this.
So, we all experienced this during COVID, didn't we? We all made a change because we were scared into making a change, right? We were scared, so we all quarantined. We all actually were able to have dinner with our families. We all stayed home, and we all were like, oh my gosh, this is great. You know, we could cook dinner together. People actually started gardening. They started, I know our tribe started going back to their traditions of how to garden and how to live off the land. Those things all, came back. And even today, they're still doing it. There's still programs now that are teaching our youth how to live off the land and how to plant in desolate areas. I went to Yellowstone during my project, Art Heals the Jingle Dress project, during COVID. And when I went to Yellowstone, we were the only ones there. There's nobody there. And you know what we saw? We saw wolves, we saw bison. The bison were actually giving birth right next to the roads. We saw these animals, otters. We saw these animals I've never seen in the past 10 years. And I saw them all during COVID. And it was because we weren't there. And then I know that there's studies too that emission levels of the whole world was low. So, yeah, scaring is kind of hard. But at the same time, it's like, it's not like we can't do it. We did do it. We survived. And at that point in time, we all kind of like were unified within our communities, and we were actually loving each other. We were actually talking to each other as human beings. And then in less than, 2 years, like even now, can you guys even remember what you were doing? Now you're in the rut again, right? You're the race, the rat race again. You're like right back in the groove. And that's what happens to us. And I mean, we don't realize, like, we're kind of brainwashed. We're just like, okay, the mighty dollar, let's move ahead. Bigger house, bigger car, faster car. I think those are the things that I feel like is missing in our lives, is a spirituality. If you actually looked at the land as it being a living being and having more respect for it, and even the animals. I don't think there's a plan B once we're done here. I think we need to really think about that. It's not a scare tactic. It's about trying to look at things more spiritual. It doesn't have to be religious. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about spirituality. My people, we believe we come from the land, and we're caretakers. We don't own this land. We're just here, and the land is actually our mother. And so in that sense, I always have that respect for it no matter where I go. And so I think if that attitude kind of changes, and we actually look at these, animals that are living as spirits, I think, we can change also.
Thank you. That example of COVID makes me think, as something that caused change, not all of which was bad, right? Some of which was needed. It got us out of a rut. It let us think about new ways of being. It makes me think, is Great Salt Lake the exact crisis that we need right now? And is that something that we haven't seen, or is that a part of how we get back to a place where we say there's a need? Each of us is needed. Each of us here in this auditorium are needed to think about this and contribute in a unique way. And does that get over, the fear, part of it is absolutely fear and self-preservation, self in a broad sense, but some of it can become love and meaning and mission when we see so many people struggling to find that right now. Or any other thoughts on how we move toward healing and restoration, or repentance, right? Restoration often means to go back to something. Repentance means to turn towards something new. But how do we get out of this place?
You know, and this relates to what Eugene was saying, is I feel like developing a connection to the earth, and I know that sounds pretty hippy-dippy. And after hearing it for whatever 30 years, it does sound like a broken record. But in my life, the way that I know that these like small changes that we need to make, like you say, to repent, right? So, for example, working the earth in my property, you plant a native plant, you think, oh, I did something, you know, I did something good. But unless you're really observant and you're aware of your place in the process of that you can do something to kind of facilitate other life forms, other than just growing plants. But so I planted a bunch of evening primrose, tufted evening primroses. It's this big white flower, it opens at night. It's pretty common here in the foothills. And I planted a patch of that in my yard. And oh, look at the flowers, they smell so nice. And then in the springtime, I noticed it just being devoured by these, whatever little, they look like little grubs, little larvae, are just completely defoliating and eating the entire plant. And then I see a scrub jay coming and eating the larva, and so it's like I witnessed my very small contribution to you plant this thing, the hawk moths come and pollinate it, which creates the seed so it can further reproduce itself. The hawk moth larvae eat the leaves, the native birds come and eat the larva, they deposit their fertilizer wherever they want, and it's like my little assist in putting that thing there and observing the whole thing. It really can, like, not that fixes very much, but like brought all of these different things into the mix and was able to observe the whole process, and it was huge. And you wonder, like, how many things are happening on different levels of life that you can't see or you're unaware of. Bacteria, fungi, all these microorganisms, the wind, who even knows what is going on. And it's really made me feel like I can do something. And so I'm just going to keep doing the something that I know how to do. And I hope that people can just find some kind of connection to the earth, the ground itself, literally the ground and things that come out of it and land on it, very important. And the water that makes all of it alive. So I feel really hopeful.
Thank you, Fritz. And you know, the first law of ecology, which indigenous and traditional peoples have known always, is that everything is connected to everything else. And we see the negative implications of that, right, where you harm a part of the system, however small or distant it seems, that negative consequence propagates through that web. But it's the same for a positive change. As you make that small positive change, then that propagates out.
I think just hearing Fritz talk about, let me start back. I had a mentor who would continually ask a question of what is your theory of social change? And it was so fascinating to me to witness, she would often ask it to a group, how many different answers come from the group, and even how that question, my answer to that question has shifted through the years. And I think there's some truth in that idea, that I think if we went around in this auditorium, everyone's answer would be slightly different. And I think that is not a bad thing. I don't think there's one right answer. So when I listen to Fritz talk about his profession and the beautiful interactions and what you're doing, I can't do that. And that's okay. But I have my own way of connecting with the earth and trying to push forward for change that I believe in. It's different, and that's okay. And I think if we all come with our own skill set to this issue, to every issue, that we believe in and care about, that's how change happens. And I think that feels manageable, because sometimes these issues can feel so large, and we have to pull them down to the scale of our own body to have hope. Like you said, like we have to pull that down to that scale to feel like we can step forward. And so I think sitting with that question for each of us, what is my theory of social change? I love that for some people, that is, they can work with legislators and policy. That is not me. That is not sustainable for me in my life. But finding for art and the way that I can try to get it out that way, that is how I do it. And it's gonna be different for all of us, but it's just taking the initiative for each of us, I think. And that plurality coming together, that chorus of voices.
Thank you. Yeah, I love scientifically, a community can only exist out of multiple species working together. If it's just all of one kind, then it's just a population. And so similarly, all of these different needs and backgrounds and skills are needed.
So I need to go pretty soon, so I wanted to leave one last comment. I've realized that I'm in my 50s now, and in my early age, I was an angry Indian. You know, I was angry at everybody, angry at everything, racism, land, everything. But today, it's not about angry or anger or being mad. It's really about changing hearts. I think I've learned along the way that yelling and screaming is not going to get us anywhere. It's more about, okay, let me tell you what I feel, what's in my heart, and what I know is true. That's the way we change minds. And a lot of times when I talk to people about my art or talk about land and everything, I always tell them, I says, you know, when we're on the same heart wave, same level, then we can have a really great discussion. And I think that's the part that I know Fritz really mentioned, really like that balance, that cycle of life. It's real simple. It's real easy. It's not difficult. I mean, my wife and I, she's sitting here, every year we have our HOA meetings, and every year I'm fighting with my HOA saying, hey, we don't need this much water on our grass. Why in the heck do we have to have green grass? I'm okay with yellow. I'm from the desert. I didn't even have a lawn when I grew up. It was just sand and dirt and tumbleweeds. I'm like, I'm okay, you know, let's conserve our water. But I have these old people that are just like, no, gotta have green grass. And my wife and I, we tolerate it. We listen to them. We understand where they're coming from. It's a whole different era, whole different way they live. So keep trying. There's hope. Every year we have the discussion. You know, I still will bring it up the next year. Hey, let's try to, conserve our water. And I'm not trying to get angry at them or get mad at them, but I just want them to know that I am concerned for the land and the water and for what we're doing and how we live in our lives and how we are supposed to be preserving our resources. So when you leave tonight, like all of us have said, you know, like Alisha really said, great thing is we all have our own values and decisions and minds to make, but we can all have a better understanding if we use our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you.